The Talk Shop.
This is The Talk Shop with me, Masachaba Mushweshwe, on SAFM 104 to 107. During Youth Month, we have said that we'll be focusing on all things relating to youth. One of them is entrepreneurship. Young people are being encouraged to venture into entrepreneurship ventures and to be self-employed. Understanding the entrepreneurial process, the initiatives and educational issues associated with entrepreneurship are key to their success. But the question is, do young South Africans have enough knowledge about entrepreneurship and its landscape to crack it? Joining us is Kojo Paris, Director of the Wits Business School Center for Entrepreneurship. And we're focusing on the support out there for young people who are looking to get into entrepreneurship and become entrepreneurs. And if you're a young person and this is what you've been trying to do, or you're a young person who has cracked it, give us a ring. Tell us about the support that you've gotten. Tell us how you made it happen. 0891 104 207, 0891 104 207, or SMS 34701. SMS number is 34701, and SMSs are charged at R2. Kojo, thank you so much for coming in. Welcome onto the Talk Shop.
Thanks, Mr. Chaba. Just one slight correction. I'm the acting director.
Acting director.
Thank you.
Okay. Acting Director of the Wits Business School Center for Entrepreneurship. Kojo, what is entrepreneurship? Do we really have a proper understanding of what we're talking about when we say that someone is an entrepreneur or one is venturing into an entrepreneurship venture as compared to a tender deal or something along those lines?
Master Chaba, it's a question that people have written lots of theses around, but in essence, entrepreneurship is the innovative use of usually limited resources to tackle challenging problems. And you can have entrepreneurs who do it in order to make lots of money. And then you've got entrepreneurs who said, we want to crack some social problem. And so there's a whole wide range to it. But it's effectively, how do you innovatively use the resources at your disposal to crack these problems?
Now, when we talk about resources at your disposal, there is a new term, tenderpreneurs. And they have been getting a bad rep, if one can put it that way, with regards to how they conduct business. Is this not taking advantage of an opportunity as a business person? Well,
that's an interesting question, and I think if you ask I think to decide this, you must say, is the person who's considered a tenderpreneur, if they weren't present and if they didn't use any means which were either illegal or corrupt, would that benefit accrue? And if that person has some special knowledge or has some special understanding of the situation, which when legitimately applied and transparently applied allows the combined parties to win that tender, it's entrepreneurial. They've used their limited resources and they've used it to create value which they should share in. The challenge obviously arises when that synergy takes place without transparency or takes place illegally. And so that is really the line.
And in terms of clarifying that line, are we going out of our way? Are we ensuring that those tenderpreneurs, who are tenderpreneurs in every sense of the word, in the sense that they saw a business opportunity, they have a skill, they may be engineers, they may be rocket scientists, you call it whatever you will, and they have a skill that would obviously put them above others in terms of getting that particular tender. Are we not, I think what I'm trying to say is, are we not creating a culture of people shying away from tenderpreneurship and not necessarily highlighting the fact that it can be positive, it is entrepreneurial?
Yes, and I think if you look back in history, particularly from the ways in which communities who've been historically disadvantaged, not just in South Africa, but many generations, many communities, have used things such as tenders or contracts as ways of leveraging themselves into the real economy. Now, the key thing is this being done in a transparent and legitimate and legal way? If this is the case, then I believe it's entirely legitimate. And generally what happens with progressive tenderpreneurs is that the second generation become builders of entities. And those tenderpreneurs give rise to people who create great companies. Now, that doesn't always happen if the tenderpreneur has secured that benefit in a way which isn't either transparent or isn't legitimate. But, there's nothing inherently wrong with winning a tender. We must get that clear.
Okay. We're talking youth entrepreneurship with Kojo Paris, Acting Director of the Wits Business School Center for Entrepreneurship. And we are taking your calls, questions, comments around youth entrepreneurship on 0891 104 207, 0891 104 207, or SMS 34701. SMS number is 34701, and SMSs are charged at R2. Many young people talking about the challenges that they face in terms of accessing information to become successful entrepreneurs. We'll talk about the role of the Wits Business School Center for Entrepreneurship and what kind of support role it can provide for young people, but also talking about entrepreneurship being seen as an alternative to youth unemployment, youth entrepreneurship being seen as an alternative to poverty, where you find that young people, and it's not just young people actually, it's South Africans who find themselves unemployed, who find themselves in situations where there is no income whatsoever, and embarking on entrepreneurial ventures, hoping to make money and get themselves out of the situation that they find themselves in. So these are not necessarily entrepreneurs who go out of their way because they want independence. These are not entrepreneurs who go on their own venture, so to speak, because they're looking to bring a business idea to fruition. They are embarking on an entrepreneurial venture as an alternative to unemployment, as an alternative to hunger, to poverty. I want to talk about all these issues with Kojo Paris, Acting Director of the Wits Business School Center for Entrepreneurship, and you're very welcome to join our conversation on 0891 104 207, 0891 104 207, or SMS 34701, and SMSs are charged at R2. We'll be taking your calls, reading some of the SMSs, and engaging Kojo Paris, Acting Director of the Wits Business School Center for Entrepreneurship.
The Talk Shop.
This is the Talk Shop with me, Masachaba Mushweshwe, on SAFM 104 to 107. We're talking about youth entrepreneurship with Kojo Paris, Acting Director of the Wits Business School Center for Entrepreneurship. And we're asking, do young South Africans have enough knowledge about entrepreneurship and its landscape to crack it as entrepreneurs? 0891 104 207 is the number to dial to be part of our conversation with Kojo. 0891 104 207, or SMS 34701. SMS number is 34701, and SMSs are charged at R2. Just quickly before we start taking calls, Kojo, how many young people are going into entrepreneurship simply because they can't find a job, and not necessarily because they want to run their own businesses, they want to venture out on their own?
Yeah, Masachaba, probably not enough, to be quite honest, and that's partly because people like us are probably not doing a good enough job of making them aware of what needs to be done and the sorts of opportunities which exist. But also we must be careful, because the reason why, or simply because someone is unemployed, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the point I always make is that we must be clear that the vast majority of us will never be entrepreneurs. But we can hope, and we can train ourselves, and we can teach ourselves to act entrepreneurially. Okay, so one of the things we're passionate about at CFE is saying we're not necessarily looking to create lots of Mark Shuttlewoods, but we're looking to create lots of very entrepreneurially acting people across our society. So that if you go to the post office, or you go to MTN, or you go to a municipality, people are acting entrepreneurially. They're being creative with the resources they have, and they're solving problems.
Acting entrepreneurially, I need to understand what we mean by that. Is this in my space in terms of how I manage my finances and how I get an extra income in? What do we mean by that?
Let's take a little example. Let's say we go to the post office, and there's a problem that I need solving. I need to send a package somewhere, but perhaps it doesn't necessarily go there directly. The person behind the desk can either tell me, no, they can't do it, or they can say, listen, here's a solution. We can do X, we can do Y, and we can get your package eventually to where it's going. That person isn't paid necessarily to do that. But what they're saying is that they're looking at the problem I have and saying, let me help you by acting entrepreneurially. I'm not going to break the rules, but I know what's possible. Okay, and that, I think, is required broadly throughout our society. That doesn't necessarily mean that the person necessarily is going to go home with more money or etc. But they're solving a problem. And often in our jobs, that's all we want to do. That gives us a lot of satisfaction. So we're keen on creating an entrepreneurial society.
You talk about entrepreneurism being solving a problem. Let's bring in the money element here. Mm-hmm. And of course, we have to, at that point, then talk about social entrepreneurship and whether we're seeing a growth in social entrepreneurship in our country and an understanding of what exactly it is.
We mustn't pretend that social entrepreneurship is something new. But what has happened globally is it's partly because people are getting disillusioned with the way in which they see the world operating. They're saying, we want to do something different. We want to not only live well, but we want to do well. And the doing well piece tends to act out as social entrepreneurship when we put it into a formal entity and create a business around it. And that drive to do that is increasing, partly because the means of doing it, particularly using new media, is increasing and giving younger and younger people the opportunity to do these things. Now, increasingly, if you were to go to CIPRO, or what the successor agency is, more and more young people are starting businesses. Mm-hmm. And this is a global trend. Mm-hmm. And partly because of new media, our young people can tap into that and be part of that trend.
Now, when we talk about entrepreneurship being solving a problem, mm-hmm. where does the money element come in?
Well, the analogy I like to give is, and I use Richard Branson. I mean, if you give me 10 seconds to do this. Richard Branson gets up one morning and said, there's a problem in the airline industry. It's not very sexy to fly, etc. And he uses his skill, his understanding of people, his understanding of systems. He creates Virgin Atlantic, which gives people a new experience, and people pay more money for it. He's acting like a traditional entrepreneur because he's going to make more money, than he would if he'd formed a traditional airline. So that's an entrepreneurial venture.
Okay.
Richard Branson also can get up the next morning and say there's a problem of malaria in South Sudan. And he uses some of the same skill sets, marketing, logistics, etc., and financial management. But his aim now is to deal with a social problem. So he applies all of those skills and he cracks that problem. He's created a social enterprise because what he's setting out to do with the second business is not necessarily to make money. He wants it to be financially sustainable. He doesn't want to lose money, but his primary objective is to deal with malaria. And so that's the sort of broad definitional differences between traditional entrepreneurship, which we all recognize as making money, and the other sort of entrepreneurship, which is becoming very popular now, which is social entrepreneurship.
Let's take your calls, 0891 104 207, 0891 104 207, or SMS us on 34701, and SMSs are charged at R2. Good evening to you, Gordon in Pinetown in KZN.
Hello, Matshaba. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Gordon.
I've been listening to your program, and I listen to it a lot, and I think it's very good.
Thank you, sir.
I started my business 33 years ago, and I just want to explain some people to entrepreneurs or future entrepreneurs. Mm. It's called return on investment. Mm-hmm. I started my business when I was in apprenticeship to a manufacturing company, and I was a service provider. And one of my customers had a TV they wanted to get rid of. It was broken. I bought it from her for 30 Rand. I then got my boss, and he helped me fix it for 1 Rand. Mm-hmm. Then a friend came to me and said, can I get her a TV? I said, I can rent you a TV for 5 Rand a month. Now, the TV cost me 30 Rand plus 1 Rand to fix. I rented out for 6 months at 5 Rand a month. I've got a return on my investment in 6 months. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. In a year, I now have a 200% return on my capital, and I still have my capital. Once a person can understand that concept, and they can do it, whether it's with TVs or anything in the world, they can start creating a business. Once they found out that they can do that, then all they need to do is work up the quantities.
Okay, return on investment, says Gordon.
Yes, that's the first thing. The second thing, for the young people, I feel that our education system should start training young boys and girls from the age of 14 to the age of 18 to be mechanics, diesel mechanics, electricians, woodworkers, bricklayers, so that when they come out of school at 18, if they cannot get a job, all they've got to do is put an ad in the paper and say, I am a bricklayer, I've got 4 years training, and I just need I can come and do your brickwork.
Okay, thank you so much, Gordon in Pinetown in KZN. Zakele, actually, sorry about that, sir, in Johannesburg. Welcome.
Hi, Navanti, how are you?
I'm good, Zakila. How are you?
I'm long time no speak. I'm not necessarily a youth myself. I'm actually over 40 now. But I just want to say what the professor was saying, or the guy from Wits. The definition of an entrepreneur is someone who's able to take limited resources and create value out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't want to unpack value today. What we need to teach our society and the people who are lucky enough to be able to get to things that actually empower them is to teach what value is. Obviously, we're talking about this thing between entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs. I'm a little bit disappointed in that labeling our people entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
I know I don't want to bring a color thing to this thing, but most of it is directed at black people. And the reason why I don't want to talk too much on it is, I can tell you now, Masichaba, all the companies coming from overseas, when they come to this country, they don't really just come here and build something from scratch. The first thing that they want when they get here, they come and tender for work. We all have to go through this tendering process, and if you are successful, you are successful. If our youth or some people are taking shortcuts, it's not because of their fault. It is the fault of the adjudicators who decide to overlook good quality work and give work to people that they feel they're connected to. Okay. That's my contribution that I wanted to say. And then the last one, I wanted to answer the question that do the young people have what it takes to be entrepreneurs?
Do they have enough knowledge? Yes.
I think the answer there is yes and no. All I want to say is these young people, they must first go to the workplace and acquire the skill. I mean, there is no way each and every second person is just going to be an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. People must go and work and acquire experience and come back. I always pride myself when I tell people that, you know what, I actually do not believe that corruption will affect me in this country, because I have to produce good quality work to make it difficult for the adjudicators and embarrass them to say, how do you decide not to award work to this individual because the work is of such a high quality? But I can tell you, it is very difficult in this country to even get people to come and work for you. Okay. Because everyone is so negative about it. Thanks.
It's very interesting, Zakela, talking about it being difficult to get people to come work for you. And at the same time, we are facing an unemployment problem in our country. And I think that is one of the challenges that entrepreneurs will say that they face in terms of the legislation in this country around hiring and firing. What does it say? Labour policy being one of the major stumbling blocks in the success of an entrepreneur. I want to talk about what the Centre for Entrepreneurship at Wits Business School is doing around those issues, if not in terms of educating more around those particular issues. But let me quickly take Ken in Durban, who's been hanging on for quite a while as well. Hi, Ken.
Hi, Mr. Shaba. It's Ken speaking, and your guest. You know, I'd just like to. I'm 72 now. Mm-hmm. We had when I first moved in there. That is before the ANC took over. We had a young guy, I don't want to mention names, he was a gardener, the local gardener. He used to go into everybody's garden. And then one day my daughter works for the bank, and he phoned her and wanted to know, he wanted a bond. And she came back and she said, how can this guy want a bond? This guy today, he only has a standard 9. He has now got a guest house and 3 safe houses for the SAP. And he comes to visit me in his Mercedes. He comes regularly every 2-3 months when he's in the area and he speaks. Now, what I'm saying is, maybe he hasn't got the education, but he's got the drive and just to keep going. And he is my idol. He's a young guy. He comes here. He knows all my kids. He asks how the kids and this and that. And what I'm saying is, education is very important, mm-hmm. but it depends on the individual as to how he wants to do it and how much he wants to do it. This guy never had the education, he had the drive, and he has done so well. I did nothing for him. I mean, he used to come here, and I mean, we were friends. But I admire the boy so much. It's unbelievable.
Ken in Durban, thank you so much for the call and for sharing that. Very interesting. As Ken was talking about this local gardener, I think for a lot of people the thinking was, okay, something corrupt is going on here. And Ken is saying, here is an entrepreneur. Here is a young person who, saw an opportunity and used it. Is an entrepreneur made or born? The
Yes,
age-old
yes,
question.
the age-old question, Mr.
Age-old
Chaba.
question.
Master Chaba, let me take a position on this. I don't believe that you can create an entrepreneur. What you can do is identify people who have an entrepreneurial instinct and a passion, and give them the tools to realize this dream, to realize this ability. I'm very wary of the notion that you can take someone who they've become unemployed or something of the sort, and they have no drive, they have no sense of wanting to take a little bit of risk or something, and create an entrepreneur. You can create probably a great manager from them, or you can create someone who acts entrepreneurially. But to create that owner of the risk, I think it's virtually impossible.
And it's as Ken said, it is something that has nothing to do with education, because we tend to think that great entrepreneurs are people who have an education. Earlier on, we had Uzakele, who said people should go into the workplace and learn before they become entrepreneurs. And
Well, actually, I agree with Zakele. I think the evidence and research is very clear that people who have formal education generally build more sustainable businesses. And I think that the reason is very simple. Is because what education gives you is a set of tools. And even if you have great drive and you have great entrepreneurial energy, if you haven't got the tools, it's much more difficult. And people in those cases tend not to grow their businesses as fast as people who have a formal education or access to formal training.
So what we're talking about here is recognizing that drive in yourself.
Absolutely.
And then going about trying to get the support, which is educational support, whatever you name it, all the tools that you will need
Absolutely.
to actually
Education-
capitalize that drive.
And Mr. Chaba, education is a part of it. There's mentorship. There's access to networks, which are probably as important as education. Mm-hmm. And really what we're trying to provide at CFE is one bit of it, which is the formal bit of it, together with some mentoring and giving people access to networks which we have. But education helps. It's not sufficient, but sometimes it's necessary if you want to really expand and build a big business.
Now, here's an interesting one. Gordon spoke about return on investment.
Yeah.
And, the thinking, and I think this is the problem, that we tend to think that an entrepreneur is someone who makes money very, very quickly. So we're looking at return on investment almost overnight. How are these expectations being managed? And would an education, would going through a course like the one at Center for Entrepreneurship at Wits Business School really expose one to busting these myths around unrealistic expectations on return on investment, what return on investment is, and what you need to put into a business in order to get the huge monies that you're looking for out?
Mr. Chab, I think it's Oprah, or it's credited to Oprah, saying that it takes 7 years to become an overnight success. And I think generally what we see when we see these amazing stories about people becoming successful is the last few months, the last year or two of their endeavors. But it's like a plant. You have to, the seed germinates and grows out of sight for many years, and that's what we see as this myth which needs that you refer to. Now, the important thing is that we will never probably get rid of this myth. What we have to do, though, Master Chab, is to identify those people with a passion, with an entrepreneurial instinct, and then take them through the process of realizing what's required. What's required to balance your books, what's required to manage your people, what's required to create and nurture markets. So these are the formal bits which we have to use to sort of modify that myth. That myth is important in terms of encouraging people and providing that dream, and we mustn't be too hard on it. There are people who have those amazing overnight successes, but the vast majority of entrepreneurs will spend years working at it, and be they social entrepreneurs or traditional entrepreneurs.
Let me take KGM in Cape Town, and then I'm going to read some of the messages coming in on our Facebook page, SAFM Radio. Hi, KGM in Cape Town.
Good evening, Mashava, and good evening to your guests.
Dumela, KGM.
Mashava, a quick one for me. I think having been molded as an entrepreneur myself over the years, I have a bit of a different take to what a lot of people believe what makes an entrepreneur being the related question. Particularly if you look at the different changes that we have gone or we underwent as a country, taken from I'm talking structurally now, Maschaba, taken from the days before 94 and now, it's a different ball game if you compare entrepreneurs who were in business then and entrepreneurs that are expected to come out of the system currently. I think we need to be realistic in terms of what the challenges are. For this country, South Africa in particular, to produce the kind of entrepreneurs that can sustain themselves in the current, in the now, it's going to take some realism from the structure that is being put in place. It is very difficult it's very easy to start a business and think you're an entrepreneur today in South Africa, compared to many countries which can be almost at the same level with South Africa globally. Now, we normally talk from a very narrow point of view as South Africans, because we normally compare ourselves to certain countries from a media's point of view. If you get realistic and you go to these countries and you listen to the people in the know who claim to know because they're telling you in America they do this, in England they do this, and you go there personally, you experience these things yourself, you realize that people are actually hanging you without realizing, because you're listening to this information, particularly from people who are not even entrepreneurs themselves, who don't have an idea. Just because a person studied or has information about entrepreneurship, then they believe that they can actually go and tell people that this is what entrepreneurs is all about. I think the point I'm trying to make, Master, is sometimes we need to consider the very entrepreneurs. You've heard of an example of one of the callers that made an example of a gardener who today is a success story. I think if we bring those people and those people tell the story in terms of how they managed to make it under the circumstances that they made it, it becomes more authentic as opposed to somebody who reads a book which was written for a purpose, and we are made to believe that because of that book being acknowledged and accepted in a curricula, therefore that big book has to mold entrepreneurs that we have to expect as a country.
I get you. KGM in Cape Town, thank you so much for the call. Kojo?
Yeah, can I comment? And KGM is a very subtle and discreet guy, and I think he's absolutely right. I'm not an entrepreneur. And I think, and it's something we were talking about at the break, that part of what we at CFE are looking to do is to showcase entrepreneurs. And the proposal we were talking about bringing real entrepreneurs onto your program to discuss this issue. I think what we're very good at the business school and CFE is really doing, as I said, the formal bit. How do we shape people into being and realizing their entrepreneurial energies and their passions? So KGM is absolutely right. We need to showcase entrepreneurs more and more, and we need to make sure that they become heroes of our society. You know, there's one example I'd like to mention to you. There's a young woman called Anne Shongwe who's founded a mobile apps business called Afros. Now, we were talking about the issue about, child molestation, etc. in your previous segment. Now, what Anne's business does is using the game format, which kids really love, is to help them to work through various situations about making choices to do with not just sex, but other moralities. Now, this is the classic social entrepreneurial approach, which is looking at some of the challenges which you were discussing earlier and using entrepreneurial energies to address it. Now, Anne spends her time talking about this all across the world. And I always say, Anne, why aren't you talking about this and promoting Afros in South Africa where we have this challenge? So this is exactly what KGM was talking about and what we need to do.
KGM also talks about support. Do our entrepreneurs have enough support? I mean, let's be realistic. Still funding is still being seen as coming from the financial institutions. And you've got your initiatives like the NYDA and various others that young people are saying are not really responding to the needs. And they, as KGM said, have people who have no concept of running their own businesses or even starting their own businesses, making decisions with whether they'll get the support or not. Are we risky in supporting entrepreneurs? Do we give them the money, the capital to venture forth? on whatever endeavor it is that they're hoping or that they're proposing, and you know, the issue of the success coming later on. Do we give them enough time to be able to achieve that success? KGM spoke about, you hear examples of what happens in the US, what happens in the UK. We're talking about a completely different funding system to what is happening here.
Mr. Chaba, KGM is absolutely right. Entrepreneurs in South Africa don't get as much support as they probably should get. But we must bear in mind that every society I've been in, the same issue arises. If you go to very entrepreneurial nations like the US, etc., people have the same complaint. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't do more, but we mustn't be too hard on ourselves, because the vast majority of entrepreneurs will find their way through the system because they are entrepreneurial. What we have to be concerned about, in a sense, is that 80% of entrepreneurs who need that assistance, and that's what we're there for. People, you know, finance is mentioned, but finance is a very tricky one, because here again, the issue about providing finance is not a straightforward one for banks and financial institutions. Most successful entrepreneurs start with what's called friends and family and their own savings to bolster their business. And once you've demonstrated that intent, that's really a big driver for banks, for other financial institutions to come to the party. So it's generally a mistake to try and go to the banks first.
Bootstrap financing.
Unfortunately, that is the reality of it. Okay. The second thing, and probably even as important or probably more important than finance, is the issue of networks. You know, most opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities, arise because I know someone who knows someone. And that is a reality also that we must face. Great entrepreneurs are great networkers. They're great at going to unusual places and making contacts. The third thing is mentorship. And this is where I think we can do a lot more in South Africa. But you know, and we're attempting to do it at CFE. Because the mentorship, someone who's saying, listen, I've walked this road before. How about X? How about Y? You know, in the middle of the night when you can't meet payroll the next day, how do you approach it?
Who would make a great mentor? I'm looking at a message coming in on our Facebook page from Ricardo Akana Peterse, who says, we're all business-minded, but we all need to be helped to unleash that potential. Mentoring from our top professionals like Mr. Sokhale, Mr. Ramaphosa, Mr. Maponya, just to name a few, would help us, the youth, to go out there and create and bring about these initiatives and you know. But the question is, do we need the big names? Do we, you know, and can Ndate Mukwena, who's got a garage around the corner from my home, be my mentor?
Absolutely. Listen, the key thing about a mentor is access and empathy. Okay? Most likely the big names you mentioned are not going to give you the time of day. What they will give you is access to networks. But for mentors, and you have two sorts of mentors. There's a specific sort of subject mentor. You know, I want to get into, say, building a great mechanic business. I'd like to find someone who's been there, broadly speaking, in that space. But I also want to have a sort of personal mentor, someone who knows me as an individual, because there are lots of psychometric issues around success. And that is a very different sort of interaction, almost like a therapist, like a personal therapist. So you've got the kind of subject specialist, the person who can tell you, okay, if you're going to build this sort of business, these are the issues you need to pay attention to. So mentorship is not really about how big and how successful the person has been, but have they walked the route? What, can they look at you and say, I've been there. This is how, you know, this is what will happen if you try X or Y.
Or even I've started that kind of initiative and failed at it.
Well, some of the best mentors are those people who don't succeed, because they can tell you really where not to go. And that is half or even more of the challenge in business. I
want to really continue talking about entrepreneurship, but we are running out of time. Quickly, how supportive is labor legislation around entrepreneurship and the hiring and firing? We're looking at entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs as the ones who will be creating jobs, the ones who will be providing jobs in our country. But is the labor legislation supporting that?
Master Chaba, this is a very complex question, but I'm going to try and reduce it to a couple of sound bites. Firstly, labor law is not as big a problem as envisaged. And we have to appreciate the context in which we're operating and the history that South Africa has. A lot of our legislation has been a reaction to certain social formations which took place before. So we have to be tread this line very carefully. The labour law is not as restrictive if applied properly. The challenge is that individuals choose to apply laws in ways which are sometimes prejudicial.
Okay, so just a quick look at SMSs coming in before we wrap up with Kojo Paris, and we will definitely be getting him back into our studio as we still have issues around social entrepreneurship and how to follow that route and what support there is for that kind of entrepreneurship to explore. We still need to talk about the courses that are being offered at the Centre for Entrepreneurship at the Wits Business School and what options are open to you if you're looking to go this particular route. Here's one that says, Richard Branson pledged to donate all profits made by Virgin Atlantic to solve global warming. Does this make him a social entrepreneur? Something that we will talk about when you come back. And another one talking for this one from Peter saying, Kojo has been my mentor for several years and is the best mentor any social entrepreneur could wish for. So we'll definitely be getting Kojo in and talking about social entrepreneurship, what it means, how you go about it. Is it a different landscape to traditional entrepreneurship? What support structures would you need under those particular circumstances? Kojo Paris, Acting Director of the Wits Business School Centre for Entrepreneurship. Thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to chatting to you next week again. Check how I'm putting him on the spot.
Master Chaba, it's been a real pleasure, and I must get this in. 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 Real pleasure.